As he said on Whit Ayres with North Star Opinion Research, for the last 35 years, we have helped elect sane Republican candidates. And it has been a real pleasure. I've met some really, really interesting people. Worked for Carroll Campbell in South Carolina, a New South Republican governor. Worked with Bill Haslam, a very, very fine governor of Tennessee, who left 8 years with 73% job approval, which is almost unheard of in this day and age. Worked with a whole host of senators. Paul Coverdell was my first one, a very fine senator from Georgia. With also Bill Frist, when he first ran, upset race in 1994, and became majority leader of the U.S. Senate. Bar Alexander, Bob Corker, Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham in the pre-Trump era, John Kennedy, a whole host of really, really interesting, good people. And it's been a pleasure to help them get elected, and I'd like to see more of them get elected in the future. I've discovered my task here today is to talk about the Trump presidency and where we go from here. I've discovered that it's very difficult to talk about Donald Trump without pissing somebody off. People feel so intensely strong about this man, both for and against, that it's very difficult to talk without antagonizing somebody. My goal here, and the only way I know how to do it, is to root what I have to say in data, merely public opinion data, and just present it as straight as I can, good, bad, indifferent. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. I'm going to show you a number of slides here. An expanded version of this presentation is on our website, northstaropinion.com, which may be easier for you to see rather than try to see it on the screen. So Matt, let's go. So how's Trump doing 1 year into his second term? Well, Donald Trump started his second term with the lowest job approval of any president in the history of polling in the last 64 years, with only one exception. Donald Trump in his first term. So he's not exactly starting with the kind of position that most American presidents have started with. Matt, let's go. His job approval has steadily declined in the second term. He is currently at his lowest point, down around 40.5% as of this morning in this silver bulletin. So it's clear that he's on a downward trend. He has lost 1/3 of his support among independents. He never had any support among Democrats. The support among Republicans has held up fairly well. Still, 86% of Republicans approve of the job he's doing. But it's pretty concerning when you lose 1/3 of your support among independents. This includes a lot of the groups that switched from Biden to Trump. That would be young people, African Americans, Hispanics. And so that's where he really has slipped, which is part of the reason, main reason, why his overall job approval has gone from some above 50 for a couple of weeks, but down to 40% now. A majority of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of immigration, the economy, trade, and especially inflation. 3 of those 4, immigration, the economy, and inflation, were 3 of the 4 reasons he was reelected in 2024. The 4th one was the cultural issue, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Let's go back, Matt. If we can look at that again. Yep. The inflation one has to be most concerning to the administration, where only 34% of Americans approve of what he's doing on inflation, which is why he's talking about affordability so much, because this is a real problem for the administration, because so many people believe, and they were basically right, that the pre-pandemic Trump economy was better than the Biden economy. And so they voted for him to bring back the pre-pandemic Trump economy, but at least based on data we've seen so far, people aren't real satisfied. Okay, Matt, let's go. Based on the experience of the last 25 years, deporting most of the 14 million illegal immigrants in the country is impossible. These are deportations by president, and you'll see that the #1 deporter in chief was Barack Obama. He maxed out at about 400,000 deportations a year, a level that Trump has yet to meet. They talk about doing 500,000 a year. They're not even close to that now. But let's just assume that Trump is successfully deporting 500,000 illegal immigrants a year. Let's see. Let's do a little elementary math. 14 million divided by 500,000 is 28 years to deport all the illegal immigrants in the country. It's obviously not going to happen. So a rational government, a rational country would take a look at these data and say, we need to figure out how we're going to handle those people who are going to be here and are not going to leave. The 2013 immigration reform bill that Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham clients worked on would have addressed a lot of these issues. It was $30 billion for border security, $30 billion in that bill. It got 68 votes in the Senate. John Boehner wouldn't put it on the floor. I had an argument with his top person ongoing. He says it wouldn't have passed. Well, put it on the floor and find out. That would have solved a lot of the problems that we're facing today. But 12 years ago, there was an opportunity and it frittered away, and now we're dealing with major league immigration issues. This is deliberately a chart from a year ago. I want to point out that the reaction to the immigration enforcement is nothing that wasn't predicted. This is American support for reporting illegal immigrants who committed crimes. 89% say, yeah, go after them. The worst of the worst, the way they talk about it. Have been accused of committing nonviolent crimes like shoplifting. 62%, get them out of here. Have lived in the U.S. for less than 5 years, 55%. This is a reaction to the feeling that in the Biden administration, the border was basically open. And we need to get rid of those people who came across. We keep going down the list. Have not broken any laws in the U.S. except for immigration laws. 57% of Americans oppose deporting those people. Have lived in the U.S. for more than 10 years. 67% oppose. Our parents of children who are U.S. citizens by birth, 66% oppose, and arrive in the U.S. as children, DACA kids, 70% oppose deporting them. What the administration is doing with rounding up people indiscriminately is opposed by the overwhelming majority of Americans. It should not be a surprise that you're getting pushback on what they're doing. Okay, let's keep going here. This is another thing that's really trouble. This is the outbreak of measles in South Carolina, primarily in the upstate around Spartanburg. A top official in the CDC a couple of weeks ago said he just dismissed it. The outbreak of deadly preventable diseases like measles is the cost of doing business in a global economy with international travel. Well, you know what the #1 employer is in Spartanburg, South Carolina? The German-owned BMW plant. Don't you think that maybe they've had a lot of international travel and global business in 2025 and before? These are 2026 numbers. And it's all a function of vaccine skepticism that's been promoted by the top public health official in the country, who last week told the world that he had been snorting cocaine off of a toilet seat. This is the kind of judgment your top public health official is promoting. And this is the result. And this is deadly stuff. We thought we had killed measles in this country until we started this vaccine skepticism. And that's the result. And kids are going to die. Okay? Defining the Trump presidency. Let's go to the next one. Picking up on what Senator Danforth said. Donald Trump is not a conservative by any historical understanding of the term, but reverence for traditional institutions, limited government, free markets, all the things that Senator Danforth was saying. It's apocalypse. What's apocalypse? Well, you're fighting for the common people against the corrupt elites. So Matt, let's go. What does this mean? Populist politicians around the world are essentially anti. They're anti-immigrant, deportable, anti-expertise. Don't pay any attention to scientists who tell you that the COVID vaccine will keep you from getting COVID. Do your own research. You may not have ever taken a course in biology, but do your own research. Anti-media, enemy of the people, anti-establishment. People who aren't on board are RINOs, Republicans in name only. There may even be a few in this room. Anti-intellectual. Let's go after the universities. Let's cut off their funding. Anti-global. We don't want to have a global economy. And so that's essentially an anti-movement. But the problem is that populist governments are great at breaking things, at blowing them up. They're not very good at creating a positive environment, a positive agenda. This is a chart of what Brits think about Brexit. And you'll see that Brexit barely passed, like 52-48. That chart, by 5 years later, the proportion of people who think Brexit's a good idea was down to 30. Opposition 55. Guess what? It's too late. They blew it up. It's gone. And now they're dealing with the after effects of that. And we'll be dealing with the after effects of that for a long time. Okay, Matt. I've been trying to think about what positive agenda the Trump administration achieved in the second term so far. That would be the agenda that would be supported by a majority of Americans. I think shutting down the southern border to illegal immigrants through rhetoric and some policy changes without any physical barriers is quite an accomplishment, frankly. I mean, Trump said, we don't need new policy, we need new president. And simply by virtue of his rhetoric, he's basically shut down the southern border, and we didn't have to spend $30 billion on it. So I think that's something that's broadly supported by the American people. Getting Europe to assume more responsibility and funding for its own defense, I think is something even people in Europe are reluctantly saying, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Obtaining a ceasefire in Gaza and getting some of the hostages out probably wouldn't have happened without Trump's pressure. Preserving girls and boys' sports for biological females has had the overwhelming support, like 80% support of Americans. The best ad that the Trump administration ran in 2024 was Kamala is for they, them, Trump is for us. And that fed into the views of about 8 out of 10 Americans. And it's a little premature to be saying this, but it looks like an economic soft landing with solid growth and lower inflation may be within sight. I mean, just this last month, jobs ticking up, inflation ticking down, maybe we're going to get an economic soft landing. So I think that's a pretty good summary of what I think are the positive things that most Americans would support. The current state of American democracy. Are there any guardrails left? This has been the subject of so much discussion in the political world, and we're getting a stress test. There is no question. We've had presidents who tested their boundaries. Obama's DACA program was instituted without any support from Congress. Biden's student loan forgiveness. But I think almost any reasonable observer would agree that Trump has pushed the limits far beyond any other peacetime president, far beyond. He said, I have an Article 2 where I have a right to do whatever I want as president. And I think he believes that. And when you believe that, there are no guardrails. 3 guardrails, I think, appear to be holding. Number 1, and we just saw it again this morning, is, let's do the next one. We saw it this morning, was federal courts with lifetime judicial appointments. None of these people have to run in Republican primaries to keep their careers going. And that is a huge, huge bulwark against intimidation. And we've seen recently grand juries. You know, the old line is a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich if the prosecutor asked them to. We've had grand juries who have rejected indictments. Most recently, the grand jury in Washington rejected the indictment of the 6 elected Democratic officials who did an ad telling the military that you don't have to obey illegal orders. They were all veterans. Rumor has it that there wasn't a single grand juror who agreed to that. That's really something. And the grand jury is just normal people, as Chris was talking about what can normal people do, have pushed back on that. This is a fascinating question from the Pew Research Center. It's about a year ago. If a federal court rules a Trump administration action illegal, the administration has to follow court orders 78%, does not have to follow court's ruling 19%. And then they went back to the 19% and said, what if it's the Supreme Court who rules that a Trump administration action is illegal? The administration does not have to follow the court's ruling down to 9%, has to follow it 10. So 10 plus 78, 88% of Americans say you have got to follow the Supreme Court's ruling. Only 9% say they don't have to. That is a stunning number, which obviously includes the vast majority of Republicans. Okay? The markets have made the Trump threat on tariff back off. You see Liberation Day, April 2nd, 2025, the markets immediately dropped. And then they kept dropping. And then he started backing off and backing off and backing off. I think the same thing happened when the threats to take over Greenland. It's not as dramatic as Liberation Day, but there was a market drop when he was over in Europe talking about taking over Greenland. And I think that's what backed him off. So you've got the markets that I think have a guardrail that has been effective. And one more, public opinion. Public opinion made Trump back off the Minneapolis ICE raids. How would you describe the actions of ICE in enforcing immigration laws? Do you think they have gone too far? 65%. Not gone far enough? 12%. Or about right? 22%. 2/3 of Americans think they've gone too far. Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff, of course, is the architect of this draconian throw them all out policy. The last time I was here, Chris, I suggested that as a dyed-in-the-wool North Carolina Tar Heel, that the problems Stephen Miller had in understanding the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and our founding principles were due to the deficiencies of his Duke education. I've had to be a little more generous. I think not even the deficiencies of a Duke education could lead to the racist, anti-immigrant bile that comes out of that guy's mouth on a daily basis. So I need to just apologize to my Duke friends for that smear last year. Okay. Outlook for the 2026 midterms. Key points about midterm elections. Midterm elections are referendum on the president's party. Always have been, always will. Therefore, the key stat to watch is the president's job approval leading into the election. It's right now at about 40. The president's party has lost 37 out of 40 midterm elections since the Civil War. That's 93%. It's lost Senate seats in 19 of the 28 since the directional election of senators. It's lost a lower percentage because, as you know, only 1/3 of the Senate's up every year as opposed to the entire House. So what happens with the president's party, a president having a 50% job approval or above? Well, you'll see in 2002 and 1998, the president's party actually gained seats. In 2002, it was the aftermath of 9/11. 1998, it was Republicans overreaching on Bill Clinton's impeachment. Every other president, even those above 50%, lost seats. The average loss of House seats when the president's job approval is above 50 is 14. But let's go to the next slide. When the president's job approval is below 50, the average loss of House seats is 32 and 4 Senate seats. Now, there's obviously a lot of variation around each of these midterms. It depends on the short-term factors. But the relationship between the president's job approval and the president's party's performance in the midterms is very, very strong. Now, we've got some mid-decade redistricting going on, but from what we can see so far, it seems like kind of wash. You may pick up some Republican seats in Texas, but lose them in California. So we'll see. But I think it would be a tremendous upset for the Republicans to hold on to that. Okay, outlook for the 2028 election. At this point in February of 2006, Barack Hussein Obama was considered a joke to be the Democratic nominee, much less the next president of the United States. At this point, in February of 2014, very few people thought Donald Trump would be the Republican nominee. It was considered kind of a joke. And yet, here he is as president. And so what that tells me is you better be real circumspect about making any judgments about the lay of the land now going in this far ahead. The Democratic nomination is completely wide open. They got some governors there, Josh Shapiro, Gavin Newsom, Andy Beshear, Gretchen Whitmer. They got a whole host of governors, and I'm sure there'll be a cast of 1,000 before it's over, and I have no idea where that's going. J.D. Vance is a favorite for the Republican Party, but it helps to remember that very few people have gone into service in the Trump administration and come out with their reputations intact. From Jeff Sessions, Tom Price, first term, to Lindsey Halligan, Most recently, Lindsay, the former insurance lawyer with no prosecutorial experience, was installed by Penn Dondi to go get indictments of James Comey and Letitia James. She ended up getting 2 gripping judicial rulings against her. She ended up having to resign and go out and try to hold on to her law license now. So it's service in the administration isn't always the elevation that we might think it would be. What was Lou said? Because of Trump's unpopularity, will Trump's heir apparent be the odds-on favorite to win the nomination? I'm not so sure. Then the door will be open to another candidate. And I don't know who that other candidate will be. Marco Rubio has gotten a lot of kudos, justifiably in my view, for his Munich speech. I worked for Marco in his 2010 upset of Charlie Crist for Senate, and we did his presidential campaign as well as his Senate campaign that followed. I will tell you that Marco Rubio is a world-class political You may not like what he's done in the Trump administration. He is a world-class talent. From what I've seen, J.D. Vance is not. So we'll see. I could very well be somebody we haven't thought of, or somebody who's kind of gone in hiding. But I think the door will be open. So what comes next? The future of American politics has a whole lot of elements to it. I think the Supreme Court is at the center of fights over the rule of law. A constitutional confrontation is not out of the question. Still entirely possible for the president to say, no, I'm not going to follow that. But I think he's running up against 88% opposition of the American people if he does that. On again, off again tariffs and trade wars are creating a very unstable environment for planning for both large and small businesses. And I think that will continue. We don't know if the businesses who have paid the tariffs now are going to be able to get a refund. And all of that's going to be decided in the lower courts. So we're going to have lots and lots of court cases dealing with billions and billions of dollars. John F. Kennedy Jr.'s cut to basic health funding at NIH and skepticism of vaccines who have long-term public implications for public health. This bothers me as much as anything else in administrations. Cutting off funds for the National Institutes of Health is cutting off your nose to spite your face. And the problem is we'll never know the consequence. We'll never know that cure for Alzheimer's that wasn't found, that cure for a certain type of cancer that wasn't found, because the basic research is not being done. Pharma does a lot of research, but it's all on drugs that they think have a particular market value. The basic research, like the research into the mRNA vaccine, was done by NIH. And that's what allowed us to have the effective and remarkably effective COVID vaccine in 10 months, which is almost unheard of. He's cut that off, and that really is trouble. China's stepping in with soft power where the U.S. has pulled back on foreign aid and USAID funding. I've been to Kenya and Tanzania with the one campaign that supported PEPFAR, the George W. Bush initiatives to fight AIDS and malaria, saw what some money could do there. And now that we've cut that off, the Chinese are coming along and saying, see, I told you Americans have. And it's not good because China sees the advantage there and moving into the hole. History suggests Democrats are going to win control of the House in 2026. The Senate seats that are up really favor Republicans maintaining control, but even that in this environment, it's not assured. And finally, it's hard to imagine any other Republican that energizes the MAGA voters the way Trump has. No one else has his combination of political instincts, ability to command attention, devotion, and entertainment value. He's sui generis. And it's really difficult for me to see someone else stepping into his shoes and being as exciting to his base and generating kind of incredible devotion from his base that he has. So I'd like to leave you with a quote from the late great Charles Krauthammer, how I miss him. In the end, all the beautiful, elegant things in life, the things I care about, the things that matter, depend on getting the politics right. Because in those societies where they get it wrong, everything else is destroyed, everything else is won.